Welcome into the Thomas Fitch Sports Show, the first episode of this semester. A lot of stuff to get to on this show. College football is back, and with that, the return of Texas football recap. We'll get to that in just a second. Later on the show, James Boswell, returning guest, is going to join us and kind of further break down the Texas game. And later on after that, we're just going to look over college football through week one. And break that down. All that's coming up right after this. All right, so we are going to kind of break down. We'll go into the normal Texas football recap, go down, break offense, defense, special teams. We're going to break that down in a little bit, but, I just want to talk about the game as a whole first. First off, this was a game that shouldn't have lost before it started. Once it started, there were definitely things. Obviously, Tom Herman said after the game that there were things that looked a lot better than last season. And some people are like, well, you still lost. Doesn't matter if you say you look better. But, both games started off slow. Offense struggled early on. Defense struggled early on, kind of struggled to just manage the speed of Maryland. But when you looked at the matchups on paper, we were a better team than Maryland, without a doubt. The only thing that they had that really excelled over us was running backs. And to be fair, that was one place where they really hurt us at the beginning of the game, was running the ball. They ran that jet sweep, and it worked well. But really what happened was the team came out slow, and there were just way too many penalties. At the end of the game, there ended up being 10 penalties. We had 10 penalties, 105 yards. But the major penalties were in the first half, and they were all by veteran guys. Chris Boyd, Gary Johnson had the targeting penalty. Andrew Beck had, I believe he had a whole, it's not like, I was expecting, okay, you got guys in there, like you got B.J. Foster, Caden Stearns, Joshua Moore, all these young guys coming in there. They're going to make some mistakes. You're going to have some false starts. But when you have your juniors, your seniors, your captains who are having personal fouls, who are roughing the quarterback, who are just not turning their heads around when they're playing defense, that's what disappoints me. And that was really what cost Texas this game, was getting down 24-7, about 5 to 7 minutes into that second quarter. And that, Texas outplayed Maryland after we were down 24-7. We flat out outplayed them. If we start that game right there, about 8 minutes into the second quarter, we win. And granted, that's not how you play football, but it was just way too slow of a start. And to an extent, that's what you expect out of a team week one. That's why A&M is scheduling FCS opponents, and not just A&M. That's why so many schools schedule FCS opponents or really small FBS schools, is because you come out slow when it's the first week. You haven't played in a while. Granted, you're scrimmaging, you're practicing, but it is not the same as a game. And I said that last semester when we were talking about the spring game. And I said, you can't get the true feel of the game until you are truly there under the lights with, well, there weren't, thousands of fans, but there were still thousands of fans there. And so until you're actually going against another team in a real game scenario, you cannot get a real feel for the team. And that's why it is tough starting off against a good team. And not saying Maryland is a powerhouse. I do think they could be good this year. I also think, I'm probably going to say this 10 times this show, but it's week one. And it is way too soon to be making gut reactions based on anything, because we do not know how good anybody is in college football. You can look at tape and be like, okay, this guy looked good. And to an extent, yeah. Okay, you can tell, okay, quarterbacks' mechanics look good. But we do not know individually how good each team is, because they've only played one team. And so that is something to take into account with this game. That is something to take into account with every game. And so obviously Texas loses the game to Maryland. Couple drives at the end. Ellinger throws the pick on the last drive, under 2 minutes, and that was it. But while Ellinger did lose the game with that interception, it shouldn't have happened. It should not have happened because, like I've said, when you dig yourself into a 24-7 hole early on, it's just so hard to come back. And the team did fight back hard. I'll talk about this in a little bit, but from what I've heard, Herman kind of took over the play calling in the second quarter, and that definitely has a big effect on why the team just shifted and all of a sudden was able to put together drives and keep moving on offense. But let's start on offense and kind of break down that performance. First of all, started off way too slow. Play calling was poor, and it wasn't just like the play calling that was poor. Granted, yes, there were drives where it was run, 3rd and 8, incomplete pass punt, and we probably did that 2 or 3 times. But on the other hand, you got to establish the running game, and there is a fine line to establishing the running game and just running it up the middle and not getting anything. And I think there was a couple too many run plays called, but there wasn't success in the air either. There was just no success whatsoever offensively. And the interesting thing was when Texas started being able to drive was when we were able to run the ball well. When we started running the ball, it opened up the passing lanes for Sam, and which in turn opened back up the running lanes. And so those kind of played off each other, especially in the second quarter when we scored those the touchdowns and the safety was the running game feeding the passing game and in turn feeding back the running game. And so a lot of people have criticized the play calling, and there were one thing that I hate, and I've hated since the Greg Davis era, the bad Greg Davis era, not the Colt McCoy Greg Davis era, the 2010, 2011 Greg Davis era, where it was just screen, over and over and over. Screen 1 yard, screen loss of a yard, 3rd and 10, now you got to throw. And there was some of those, and I just feel like it never worked. But again, that's another play that you got to establish everything else working to get it going. And when no part of the offense is working, it's hard to get any other part of the offense involved. But offense started off way too slow, and we'll talk about this later in defense. But when the offense is going 3 and out every time, you're not giving the defense any break. And so that definitely hurt the defense. We'll talk about that, though, more when we break down the defense. However, so when you get to the second quarter, it was about 22, 23 minutes into the game when Texas had their big drive. It was about a 65-yard drive, actually a drive, because the first touchdown was the about 30-something yard touchdown pass from Ellinger to Duvernay, which was set up by the nice punt return by Brandon Jones. But that was one play. That wasn't a drive. And one thing that I feel like Texas has not shown in the past is ability to really establish long drives where it's, a good run on first down, sets up 2nd and short. You can maybe run it again, or you little out route to the tight end. You can throw it across the middle. The field was actually spread out. Whereas last season, the only place that we threw the ball was to the sidelines, and then you kind of ran it up the middle. The whole middle of the field was not an option. And it was because when Bouchel was in, he can't see there. When Ellinger was in, there was no trust for him to throw to the middle. He actually threw to the middle. He also, another thing, and this will we can start talking about O-line now. There was some good pass protection there. And again, granted, it's week 1. Who knows how good Maryland's D-line is? They could be terrible. But Ellinger, until the Maryland got some pressure on him in the second half, but there were so many times where he was just sitting back in the pocket for a good 3-4 seconds. And when you can have that time in the pocket, guys are going to get open. And so it got to the point where he's sitting back there, and every time he released the ball, I actually had confidence, which is the feeling you should have in a quarterback, but I feel like has not been there for me. And, most Texas fans, when he's thrown the ball or just anybody's thrown the ball just because there's been inconsistent play. But that was definitely an improvement on the offensive line, bringing in some grad transfers and just being able to have guys be more experienced definitely helped there. Now, there was some struggle on run blocking. Granted, like I said, the running game kind of picked up in the second quarter and into the second half, but it still felt like there weren't great holes, and the running backs were kind of having to create and make holes for themselves. But regardless, definitely felt like I saw an improvement in the offensive line. And that's one of those things where when people were criticizing Herman for saying, when Herman said that there was an improvement, and people are saying, I still see a loss. Yeah, I still see a loss too, but I also see improvement, and I see this is one game. And college football fans are, especially these diehard blue blood fans, are obsessed with the one game. And you got, especially when it's the first game, and you can't be like, oh, well, at least we won that and that. Because all you're looking at is 0-1. And that's not a good look. But you got to look. This is a much better team, and this is just the first thing I'm talking about. O-line who can actually block some of the time. That is something we had not seen in the past. Let's move on to wide receivers. Much better wide receiving core. I would still like to go back and watch some tape of this because there were times where Sam sat back there for a while. And granted, Maryland, they didn't drop many blitzes. There were a lot of times where, you look at the fourth quarter when they were just playing prevent rushing, like they had two guys rushing and one guy kind of staying back in a spy. And so in that case, I get, okay, guys are going to be more covered. But there are some times where you're wondering, okay, you have Lil Jordan Humphrey, you have Devin Duvernay, you have Colin Johnson, probably one of the best trio of wide receivers in the nation, and they should be able to get open. When you have that much talent on the field, they should be able to get open. Regardless, those three guys that I just mentioned, LJ, CJ, and Devin Duvernay combined 199 yards, and 13 of the 21 receptions in the game were by those three guys. Just incredible catch. Duvernay had the diving catch in the end zone for the touchdown. Colin Johnson had 3 or 4 incredible catches on the sideline. Lil Jordan is just impossible to bring down. So you just mix the speed, the height, the size of those guys, and they're so good. And so that is something that I would still like to see develop because they are so good. The question is, are they able to get separation? And if they are able to get separation and Ehlinger's just hesitant, again, that's something that's hard to see when you're just watching it on TV. But if it's just Ehlinger being hesitant, that is something that worries me because that was something that we saw with Shane Buechele. That was one of my problems with Shane Buechele last season. It's just sitting back there in the pocket, not knowing who to throw to. You got to be decisive as a quarterback. You got to have that gut instinct. This guy's open. I'm going to throw to him. Check down, throw to him. You don't have time to overthink. When you overthink, that's when you just sit in the pocket and end up getting sacked. But for the most part, I thought that was good. There were some drops. It's first game. There was rain. It was slippery. Who was it? Joshua Moore. He was him, and I think there was a couple other young guys who had drops. And that, it's a first game of the year. You're gonna have some jitters. And I'm sure that was absolutely what was there. And some of them, they weren't the best thrown balls by Ehlinger, but they still hit them in the hands. And so that's something to improve on. Kyle Porter, running back, but had a big drop at the end of the game that probably could have changed the outcome. And so that's something definitely that would like to see improve is, it's a struggle. When you're the quarterback and you're trying to gain confidence and every time you throw it to a guy, he drops it, that's not good. And it's really not good when, Lil Jordan, Colin Johnson, these guys will be gone in a year or two. And so you're going to have guys who are going to step up. And you got to have guys who are getting confidence. But other than that, I thought really good play on the wide receivers. Tight ends, not using them a ton still, but it is nice. I finally feel like I have confidence in our tight ends. Andrew Beck is finally healthy. You have Cade Brewer as his backup. And we didn't use them a ton, but when we did, it was effective. They're good blockers too. And so that's a position that we haven't seen be successful in a while. But really just haven't had much talent there. Andrew Beck's been injured, and before that he was young, and so it's good to finally have tight ends that I feel confident in. Let's move over to talking quarterbacks. I think we'll talk more about this when James comes on the show, but here's my take. It hasn't changed much from last year. But here's the deal. I of course, Team Ehlinger podcast, and I'm not just saying that because I said that. Like, I truly believe that Sam Ehlinger right now is the right fit for Texas. Because, and I said this last year, Ehlinger may lose more games than Buechele does, but he's also playing against better teams. Obviously, Maryland not, but, looking at last year, and we're at least in the games when he plays. And we were in that Maryland game the whole time. With Buechele, that offense stays stagnant that whole game. That's my feeling. And granted, I've heard that, it was a close race. I've heard they've both improved. I just still feel Buechele doesn't have much to grow upon. Ehlinger does, because his accuracy has improved. He can throw across the mid. Like, if you looked at tape from him last year to this season, he can throw so many more places. He's not just throwing little out routes, because that was out routes and slants. That was all he threw last year. He can actually throw to the middle of the field. He can stretch. He can throw the deep ball. He had a 37-yard touchdown. And so where he can throw has improved. His accuracy has improved. really the only thing, if he doesn't throw that late interception, if instead he leads the team on, a game-winning touchdown, we're saying a completely different thing. And I know, yeah, that was the same thing he did last year, but that's a fairly simple fix. That's a pretty simple fix of just like, hey, I mean, and that's coaching. He said after the game that he thought he was like 3rd and 10. I got to throw. It's the last play, and I was like, no, you still have the 4th down, and that was where it's like, okay, is that poor coaching? Is that just like not the best football IQ there? But I just feel confident when he's on the field. I feel confident when he throws. He can extend plays better than Boswell can, and he can stay healthy. And I'm not saying that I think Ellinger is like a Heisman candidate. I don't think he's a great quarterback. But I think when you look at what Texas has, he's the best option. And I say that I like Cameron Rising. I really liked what I saw out of him in the spring game. I really did. He played great, has a great arm, but he's young. Ellinger's young too, but he has a lot of experience. And so to say, hey, we're going to throw out this experience for this young guy who we don't know much about, that's something that I think is very dumb, very pointless. And so I think for now, my desire would be to stick with Ellinger. Let him play the rest of the season if possible, and see where that goes. But I think this Tulsa game is definitely going to be, because again, the Tulsa game will be a win. Like it's going to be a win, and I don't want to. When I was talking about the Maryland game before the season, I said that was probably going to be a win, and obviously we have better. We match up better against Tulsa and Maryland, both teams, but it's a different level of competition, Tulsa versus Maryland. And so when I look at playing Tulsa, that's a game that we will win and is going to be a good chance to – it's kind of like a second scrimmage, almost kind of a feel of seeing, okay, give Ellinger some chance to play. And I think we'll see Boswell as well, just to give him a shot to play in a real game scenario. But at this point, you got to stick with Ellinger, in my opinion. He's given you results, and I know a lot of people say what results. He's 2-5 as a starter, but he's in games, and he's in games. Like I said, this game he did not lose. This game was lost in the first 20 minutes of the game by stupid plays. Chris Boyd drops an interception at the beginning of the second half. If he catches that, and we go back and score, that's a 14-point swing because Maryland scored the play after that. And so little things like that, and that's why I say you can't – I said I was going to say it a lot. You cannot judge games based off of – or you cannot judge teams based off of week 1 in college football, because everybody's still figuring stuff out. Everybody is still improving, and you don't know the level of every other team. And so, if Texas plays Tulsa first, I think they easily beat Maryland week 2, and I think very few people would have objections with that. And so that's why I think it's way too quick to be like, okay, Herman just sucks because he lost to Maryland twice. And I again, same way with Ellinger. I have a good feeling about Herman. I have a good feeling about this team, regardless of this win. Granted, there's a lot of football left. If this team goes into conference 1 and 2, I'm going to feel a lot worse. But I have a lot of the things I saw in the offense were things that I didn't see last year. The team could sustain drives. We could not sustain drives last year. We couldn't. We could have big plays every once in a while, and occasionally we could have a nice drive at the end of the game, but it was not consistently driving down the field. And there were a lot of times, even in like the third quarter, where we would start driving, and then third down, somebody drops a pass when they would have had a first down. Little things like that where you're not ending the drive because the offense just cannot produce. It's because guys are making little miscues. Guys are committing penalties when they shouldn't be. And that is stuff that can be fixed. Now, if Tom Herman cannot fix that stuff, then that says something about him as a coach. But if he is able to fix that stuff, and I think this is a big test. I think this is a great test for him as a coach, because I've had a lot of belief in him. But the question is, can he get the guys to rebound and say, hey, we lost one game to Maryland, but we still have 11 games left, and we still are undefeated in conference play, and we still have a chance to win the Big 12 championship. All we need to do is fix the small mistakes and come out every game and start the first quarter and play the whole game firing on all cylinders. And if he can do that, and if the team can respond from this loss and get some momentum going into conference play, then that's all you really want and all you can ask of a coach. You can't ask, a coach cannot make players play good. He can prepare them to play good, and he can motivate them, but he cannot, in the moment, make them play good. And that's another thing that, people just in this kind of era of college football, people don't give coaches enough time. And I don't think Texas gave Charlie Strong enough time. I hope Texas gives Tom Herman enough time. But, I said this last year. You look at Gus Malzahn at Auburn. He was almost fired that last year at the beginning of the season. They went on and were in one of the New Year's Six games. And right now they're ranked in the top 10 and have a good chance to win the SEC or at least contend. And if they had fired him, all that's out the window, and they're in rebuilding mode right now instead of in the top 10. And so that is why it's so huge to give people time to fully develop This is only Herman's second year. This is his first recruiting class that he's actually brought in, and that is truly his guys that he wants to build a system around. And so you got to give him time. Let's move on to the defense. I did feel a little less optimistic about this group. And that was just because the defense was so good last year that it was going to be hard to match that. When you're losing guys like, you lose Malik, you lose Deshaun, you lose Holton Hill. So there was going to be a little bit of a hangover from last year being so good. And again, when you start off and you give up 24 points in the first 22, 23 minutes, that is not responding to a good season last year. And I would say the main reason that we struggled at the beginning was it wasn't really execution. It was a lot of penalties. It was getting Maryland to a third down, stopping them on third down, and we have a little emergency test here at Texas. But I'm just going to talk through this. This is just a test. Do not worry. But the thing was, it was dumb penalty. It was stopping them on third down, and then Charles Omenihu goes and has a late hit on the quarterback. It was not being able to get outside on that jet sweep. It was Chris Boyd not turning his head around and getting a pass interference called to him on third down. It was Chris Boyd dropping an interception. Little things like that, and next thing you know, they're up 24-7. And the other thing, like I mentioned earlier, the offense not being able to stay on the field, and the defense was just winded. Maryland plays with that hurry-up offense, and when the defense has about 2 minutes on the sideline to rest because the offense goes run, incomplete pass, punt, they're going to be exhausted when they're getting out there. And some of that is, okay, was there not the best conditioning this year? Because Tom Herman does like to talk about, this is the best we've looked conditioning-wise. The guys are this, and they put on this many pounds of muscle and lost this many pounds of fat. And yet Caden Stearns is out there, holding his hips, and they're all, everybody's winded. And I certainly hope that the problem isn't that is a poor conditioning, but that is something that needs to improve. And also, again, I feel like I sound like a broken record a lot on this, but playing in a game is a lot different than playing in a scrimmage. And so the exhaustion of being in-game is a whole nother level. And so it is the first game. It makes sense to me a little bit that they're fatigued, but I would have liked to have seen less fatigue coming out of a team that, that has been so hyped for how good the conditioning has been so far this year. Let's see, another thing. Yeah, struggled with the jet sweep early on, but again, they figured that out by the second quarter, and that play wasn't that effective. They scored 24 points in the first 22 minutes, and the rest of the game, the next 40 minutes, they scored twice. And so at the end of the day, that's good on Orlando to regroup the guys and be like, hey, we are not doing this. We need to step up and stop letting them go around the edge, force the guy inside, or force him out where the cornerback can go and get him. They did a good job of that by the end of the game. And so that did encourage me. Again, the defense struggled against Maryland last year and ended up being one of the best defenses in the nation. And so the fact that this defense could almost fix their problems in the second quarter instead of saying, hey, let's wait till the USC game to fix our problems. Again, some more encouragement. By far the star of the defense, though, Brandon Jones. He was everywhere, led the team in tackles, 10 total tackles. He had some great returns, punt and kick returns. And that's just a fun guy to, that's one of those guys that last year we kind of saw Deshaun Elliott and Holton Hill be guys that were, they were names that we had heard talk, but all of a sudden they come out and they just light up the field. So he's going to be a name to watch. Chris Boyd had highs and lows. Little bit disappointing because it kind of feels like it's his defense. He's the most experienced player in the secondary. Drops a big interception, but he also had some big tackles, and he's our best coverage cornerback. And so, he played good, but he just had some crucial mistakes. And that is something that you got to fix going into Big 12 play. Because at this point, this is not a team that's contending for a national championship. It's not. This is a team that I don't think has the skill to do that. However, Big 12 championship is not out of play. I'm not necessarily winning, but 2 teams in the Big 12 obviously go to the Big 12 championship. You can still drop a game or 2 and make it to the Big 12 championship. At this point, this team really can't drop another game and make it to the national championship game, nor do they have the caliber to do that. But you got to remember, the team has not played a Big 12 game yet, and so I think that you gotta be. That's why I said Herman has to regroup the guys and say, "Hey, Big 12 title is still on the table, and that is still our number one goal is to win the Big 12 title." And so while there were little mistakes in this game, you still have 2 more non-conference games to improve on that before you go and play in conference. And that is why I feel like I have not been freaking out about this team as much as everybody else has, is because it's one game and you still have a lot of opportunities to win the Big 12. I mean, obviously you still have every opportunity. Kansas could still win the Big 12 statistically, but I do think this team has the skill to compete for the Big 12 championship if they can get the execution down. Another thing on defense, the lack of depth definitely was exposed in the game. And that was the one thing I was worried about on defense coming in was the backups, especially with the front 7. Obviously, the starting 11 was really solid, probably one of the better defensive units in the nation. But there just not much depth when you consider a lot of injuries, especially at the linebacker position, suspensions, guys transferring, and that just leads to not a lot of guys there. And so when you start the first half without Anthony Wheeler because the targeting the Texas Bowl, which is super dumb. Why are you suspending a guy who, from the last season? That's whatever. We can talk about targeting another time. And then Gary Johnson has a targeting penalty in the second half. Again, that's one of your leaders, your oldest guys not stepping up and committing a dumb penalty. But you miss him for the second quarter and the second half. And so definitely was a struggle. There were a lot of times where over the middle of the field, there was just no one there. And that's what happens when you're having to play with backup linebackers. And that also hurts as far as fatigue, just because there's not as many backups. But all in all, for saying that you were playing half the game without Anthony Wheeler, 3/4 of the game without Gary Johnson, 2 of your best players on the team, the way that the defense responded in the second half of the game is very impressive. One player that I would like to see step up is Hager. I have heard that he was kind of told, and I get why they told him this, but he was told really not to go after the quarterback in the first half. And the reason that they would say that is obviously last year Maryland tore us up on the ground because they're just you bring in the blitz, the quarterback escapes, there's no one there, so you kind of have to have that spy. But on the other hand, if you're not getting any pressure to the quarterback, they have all time to sit back there in the pocket and wait for guys to get open. And so that wasn't the best, but he definitely came alive more in the second half and had a big impact. And finally, defensively, the future looks really bright for Caden Stearns and B.J. Foster. Had some big hits, just flying around, and they're true freshmen. And so I'm really excited to see those. They were probably some of our best, most disciplined players, and that's not exactly what you expect out of true freshmen. And when you have everybody else on the team, or not everybody else, but when you have guys like Chris Boyd, Gary Johnson, Charles Aminu, your leaders committing dub penalties. But that was exciting. Really briefly before James joins us, special teams, again, ups and downs. Bachevsky, he's not Dixon yet, but that's okay. He had 9 punts for 339 yards. It's 37.5 yards per punt. He started off with a 56-yard punt, and tell you what, the internet went crazy. Everybody was going Bachevsky for Heisman, but he also had a 15-yard punt. But you got to remember, that's how Dixon was his freshman year. He had a 10-yard punt at the end of the game against Oklahoma State that cost us the game. And yet 2 years later, he wins the Ray Guy Award. He's the MVP of the bowl game. he's about to be NFL MVP. And so I still think there's a lot of promise there for Pachevsky just because he's young. And on the kicking side, Dicker only kicked. He didn't have any field goals, but extra point, he actually got the ball up. And the problem last year with Joshua Rowland is he had all his kicks were line drives. And that was why, especially the Maryland game had some block kicks. Other games had block kicks because when you're kicking it so low, it makes it easy to block. And so Dicker, just as far as form on extra points, looked good. We'll have to watch for that. So hopefully he's good from long range. Kickoffs were good too. Returns look good. Every kickoff return made it past the 25-yard line. That's kind of your goal. No returns all the way to the end zone, but still there were some close ones where guys only had one or two men to beat. You had Jameson and Jones back there doing a great job. And while we're at it talking special teams, not talking NFL this week because it starts next week, but we are the first Michael Dixon for NFL Rookie of the Year and MVP podcast. So just want to put it out there that we are the first, and that I know of right now, only podcast that is pro Michael Dixon for NFL Rookie of the Year and MVP. But in all, I mean, the dude killed it in spring or in preseason. Really excited to see how he can play with the Seahawks. But anytime you can go into, first of all, special teams in the NFL is so tough, just because it's kind of you mess up once, you're gone. But to go in there and be competing with one of the best, most veteran punters in the league, John Ryan, and have them release John Ryan for you, that means that the team really likes him. Obviously, we like him. I just love how he's kind of blown up kind of NFL Twitter, and everybody's like, oh, shoot, punters are actually good. And everybody at Texas were like, yeah, we know. We've seen him for the last year. He was our bowl game MVP because he is that good. So it's going to be really excited to see him just tear up the NFL this year. Anyways, when we come back, James Boswell is going to join us. All right, we now welcome in Texas sports analytic expert James Boswell to kind of further break down the loss to Maryland. So James, what are your initial takeaways from the game?
Well, first, that's a great title. I've never gotten called that before, so I appreciate that. That's a new one. I mean, obviously, as someone who follows Texas football, this is something that we're very familiar with. This feeling of sort of emptiness and loss and all that stuff is nothing new. But the strange thing for me is that I felt like after that game, I didn't have the same level of despair, I guess I would say, that I probably felt like I should have after another game-ending interception.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen that so many times before, and this was supposed to be different. But going forward, I saw a lot of good things, or at least I told myself I saw good things, enough that I felt like I didn't have that gut-wrenching despair, but rather like, that was annoying. Let's not do it again.
Right.
That's a different feeling.
Right, and I touched on that earlier, but it was little miscues, little penalties.
Mm-hmm.
It was Gary Johnson getting ejected for targeting. It was Chris Boyd not turning his head around.
Mm-hmm.
That it was that kind of stuff that really cost us the game at the beginning when we were down 24-7.
Well, my theory. My personal theory is that we got confused on the time. That's easy to happen. It's an 11 o'clock Eastern game.
Right.
We don't do we're used to 11 o'clock Central. That's my theory, is that we thought it was 11 Central, and that's why we missed the first quarter. But, if you take out the first quarter, and the first quarter was, I think that's obviously an anomaly. I think if you look at the second, third, and fourth, as bad as the fourth quarter was, the fourth quarter, at least we were still doing things right. We just made mistakes. But this is a team in the first quarter that was just not there. Defensively, offensively. The first 3 drives on offense were not even close to the game of football.
They weren't dry. It was run, pass, punt.
Right, but nothing happened on those plays.
No, run for a yard, run for a loss of a yard, incomplete pass.
Incomplete pass, way over.
Yeah.
Big misses. If you take out the first quarter, all of a sudden you think, okay, this is probably a more accurate representation of this team. Herman said in his press conference, we were trying too hard. And you have to take what the coach says with a grain of salt a little bit, because obviously he's not going to say, yeah, we suck. But if we look at that, I still think it's easy to say that's probably an accurate representation of what was going on. When you've got a team like Texas, that's been told Texas is better than this. This is not right. Texas will be back. Texas is back.
You have people on Fox Sports saying Texas is going to win it all.
Right. That never helps. I mean, you're going to put pressure on yourself when you're told this is the year, especially a lot of these guys. Like we talk about Brecken Hager said, I'm not going to cut my hair until Texas wins a Big 12 championship.
Yeah.
And he also has said, like, I'm really disappointed with the way my time on the 40 acres has gone. Well, there's so much pressure on a lot of these older guys to say, we've been here through the worst and we're better than that, that it's very easy for me to think they probably did go out and try too hard. But there was still, I mean, if we get beyond, like, what went wrong, it's obvious what went wrong. Texas didn't show up in the first quarter, got down early, and then couldn't close out the game by making three turnovers in a row. If you don't turn the ball over 3 times, I think Texas wins, and we all go, oh, boy, that was rough. But we come away with a win, and so that's it's a different scenario.
Yeah, it's very true, and I think that was a good point on like the kind of trying too hard, and kind of explains, if that is the case, why it was the older guys at the beginning of the game, kind of acting nervous, committing those dumb penalties, doing those dumb things. So after this game, there's still 11 games left in the regular season, possibility bowl game, Big 12 championship. So looking forward to the rest of the season, what are your feelings on this team with a lot of time left?
Yeah, I think it's a little early to say what are your feelings on the rest of this team.
Right.
I think I'm going to say the same things that I've been saying for a couple years now. Lots of potential, lots of, that's potential good and bad. This is a team that we look at, and we've been looking at all offseason and said this is a team that can contend in the Big 12.
Right.
Lots of experts have said that, not just hopeful fans. I still think that's true.
Absolutely.
However, there's a lot that needs to improve. Obviously, we thought that we wanted to see the improved Ellinger. I think we saw an improved Ellinger. Yeah. When Sam Ellinger came out, barring the first quarter, which we're scrapping that because we're saying that's not an accurate representation of this team. I think the fourth quarter is probably more accurate.
Right.
We saw an improved Sam Ellinger throughout the game. Obviously, a lot more accurate passing. A lot of those deep balls where last year he missed those. This year, I mean, the receivers made plays. That's probably my next thing I'm going to say. Yeah. But we saw an improved Ellinger who was able to make throws, put the ball at least somewhere that it needed to be.
Spread out the field. It wasn't just little out routes.
And stand in the pocket.
Yeah.
He only ran, 2 or 3 times the whole game?
Yeah, 3 times.
Realistically, he only ran 3 times.
And they were all really in the fourth quarter.
Right. In that situation, and that Maryland's playing prevent defense at that point, it's an appropriate time to run.
Exactly.
So if we look at that, I'd say that is a big improvement for Ellinger as a guy last year who couldn't stand in the pocket for more than 2 seconds because we didn't have a pocket. But also, Texas did not have a pocket last year, but the quarterback was not able to stand and make decisions. Yeah. He would just run. Yeah. This year we saw a quarterback stand in the pocket, make reads, make decisions, and then go if he had to.
Right.
And that was a big improvement, more accurate passing. And until the end of the game, no interceptions.
Right.
I mean, he was playing a clean game until the end, and I hate to say until the end, because obviously the end is important, he had good games last year until the end, like USC.
Right.
But I think where we're looking there, we've got improved quarterback. The next point I touched on was receivers. We have improved receivers.
Absolutely.
We've been saying for at least 2 years now, this receiver core is good, and that has been true, but not if you watch the games.
Yeah.
But we got players like Devin Duvernay has been an underachiever, and he made probably the best play, just single-handed athletic play of the game on both sides. That was an amazing catch.
Yeah.
That was not what I expected from Duvernay. When I saw that play, I thought, oh, Colin Johnson. And then I went, oh, wait, no, that was Duvernay.
That was Duvernay, yeah.
That was Duvernay. He's not supposed to do that. Or he's supposed to do that, but he hasn't been anywhere close to that.
Right.
We've seen Colin Johnson in spring camp. We saw him a little bit at the spring game. We saw him a little bit in Maryland, making some good catches. If our receivers play the way they're supposed to play, then the receiver core is strong enough to make that happen.
And I brought this up earlier. The trio of Lil Jordan, Colin Johnson, Devin Duvernay had 199 yards receiving, 13 of the 21 receptions.
And those are the names other than Duvernay, those are the names we've been saying. And Lil Jordan had a fantastic game.
Absolutely.
I mean, maybe 2 drops? I can remember 2 drops from him. And they were unfortunate drops, but not a big deal. You should be able to recover from those. Texas couldn't because it's Texas.
Right. And when he's one of those guys that you just want to get the ball in his hands.
He was a reliable receiver.
He's got good hands, and when he gets the ball, he can do stuff
10, 15 yards.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say 8 to 15 yard. Those are solid plays. And that's the biggest point that I say when I look at this team and say potential and not just same old script as last year. Last year, if you looked at the way Texas played, offensively it was, hey, we've got some talented guys.
Right.
Go get lucky.
Right.
Try to run because that's what you're supposed to do in football. But obviously no running happens, so just throw it up, hope that someone catches it, or send your quarterback on a little run. Like, do something, get lucky, get 10 yards, and stay alive.
Yeah.
That was the Texas offense last year. And this year, well, this last game, barring the first quarter, this game, we saw a team that was able to run plays, run plays,
Right.
stand in the pocket and throw,
Right.
and complete passes, get 5-6 yard plays. Those are
Right.
important. The
Right.
5-6 yard.
The team
Second
can
and
develop a
second and
drive.
5,
Yeah.
second and 4. That's better than second and 7 or second and 9,
Right.
or 13. I mean,
Right.
a drive
Right.
happened
Positive
in
play
a way,
on a first down
Mhm.
that sets up for a good second down where you can get a first down or at least get it close.
and that
on third
opens
down.
up your playbook.
Exactly.
And that's what this offense did not have last year. And I think
Right.
that was a major point. I'm not going to talk about the defense because we hope that we expect the defense to get back on track and
Right.
be its Todd Orlando self.
And they really did after they
Uh-huh.
give up 24 points, 22 minutes, and they gave up, what was it, 10 points after that?
Yes, and
touchdown
made
and
3
field
stops
goal.
in a row.
Yeah.
The
At
defense
the end
did
of
what
the
they did
game.
in the fourth quarter.
Right. And so, that was one thing I didn't touch on was the fact that when defense needed to make stops, they made stops.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the number one thing you can ask out of your defense is to get stops when you need them to. And that's something that I feel like his defenses have done last season.
That's
and
a
obviously
strong suit. And you go back to his time at Houston.
Yeah.
I think back to that season opener game at Oklahoma, which is the only Houston game I watched. So that's all I'm working on.
Right.
But that defense was able to stand in there and say, hey, we need to stop. We got to stop.
Yeah.
I mean, fourth and 1.
Yeah.
Whatever. That 4th and 1 stand. You say this is a defense that hasn't gotten stops all game.
Right.
Now 4th down, they got to stop.
Yeah.
That was an important stop.
Yeah.
Stuff like that has happened. So I'm not worried about the defense going forward. I think that's a defense that's going to play up to its level that it should be playing. Biggest improvement was the offense. Now we still have to talk about that interception.
Yep.
That was classic Ellinger throwing the ball where he shouldn't have because he tried to make something happen.
Yeah.
And that is going to have to be addressed. And
Right.
if a season of film, of terrible, terrible film,
Yeah.
doesn't improve that, I don't know what does.
Right.
And hopefully, I mean, it could just be a situation where you say that's a liability. We have to overcome that.
Yeah.
And we have to not put ourselves in game-winning drives.
Yeah. That's very true. So talking about that, who do you still like at quarterback? Is it still Ellinger that you want to be starting right now?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I mean, here's why. I do think that if the offensive line can stay as good as it can,
Right.
I think this is a team that Bouchel could do well with.
Right.
But the thing is, what we saw on Saturday was that Ellinger was able to do the things that Bouchel could do.
Right.
What Bouchel's strength is his arm.
Right.
Standing in the pocket, rolling out of the pocket because he can't see over the line, but throwing
Right.
the ball downfield.
Right.
That is his strong suit. And but he can't really run that well.
No.
Or if he can run, he doesn't have the instinct to run at the right time. We saw a lot of times he got sacked because he didn't go.
Right.
Whereas you say you put Ellinger in that spot, he will go and he won't get sacked.
Right.
So I think if you look at the strengths, Bouchel obviously has the better arm.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw on Saturday, Ellinger got his arm, I would say a comparable level.
Yeah.
And so that negates that advantage. But we still have those 10, 12-yard runs,
Right.
that instinct to avoid sacks. That's so important, especially if we have an offensive line that might be better,
Yeah.
but might not be. You got to have that ability to avoid sacks.
Yeah.
I would say an interception every now and then
Right.
is better than a consistently getting sacked.
Yeah.
I would take that. I think
Absolutely.
interceptions are horrible, but if you've got a good defense, you can recover from an interception better than you can recover from 3 sacks.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I want to talk briefly about the last interception. Obviously, the interception with about 6 minutes left in the fourth, his arm got hit.
That's not an excuse.
Yeah, but I would argue that it is because how can you
I mean,
you can't control
okay, that's true.
getting hit.
So it's a fluke play. I guess I should say that's not an excuse. That is an excuse. That's exactly what happened. And I think
Right.
it's fair to say, okay, maybe that one's not on. Like, we don't say,
Right.
oh, same old Sam, he threw an interception.
Yeah.
But you do have to take ownership for it. And from what I heard in his press conference,
He
he
did,
did, which is
he said
important.
I got hit, but it's still an interception.
Right.
But you look at the last play, the last interception that actually did cost the game. That only you touch that only happens because you're in that game-winning drive scenario where they're being able to be in prevent to where he was going to have to force a throw at some point.
On the next play,
Right.
on 4th down, not
And
3rd
so,
down.
and granted, right, I would have, a smart quarterback IQ would have said, hey, throw it out of bounds now, let's wait till 4th down. But he was probably, when you're rushing 2 guys and having one guy as a quarterback spy, you're going to have to force it.
Yeah.
For the most part. And so, again, you still don't want to see that. You would have loved to have seen him wait till 4th down and at least give one more shot.
Would you say that you hate to see that?
You hate to see it.
Yeah, you really do. You really do hate to see that.
To see it. But yeah, I think definitely still like sticking with Ellinger. Obviously Cam Rising looked good in the spring game.
I don't want to start a freshman this year. I don't want to start a freshman at all.
Would you want to see him at least in the Tulsa game because of the new getting 4 games to play before and still being able to redshirt?
I think that's something that you could look at and say, yeah, if we're in a blowout, and conceivably, I mean, realistically, the only teams I see this Texas team blowing out is Tulsa, maybe Kansas, but maybe Kansas. I don't know. I mean, again, this is a team that has the tendency. Well, I'm not saying question mark for a win. I'm saying question mark for blowout. This is a team that plays to the level of its opponent.
That's a fair point. And we saw that last year.
Same thing. Well, that's what I'm going on.
But yeah.
Right. So conceivably, Tulsa is probably our main opportunity to see a blowout.
Yeah.
And in that case, I think you maybe consider putting in Rising, but I also think you owe it to Buechele in a blowout to put him in. Because this is a guy, Herman says he's been embodying the culture. He's a backup. He was the kid.
Right.
He was the star who comes in, beats Notre Dame, and then, of course, everything falls apart after that. But this is a guy who comes in and is awesome, and it's his team, and then, Rich Westlake kid comes in and takes over the team.
Right.
That's a terrible situation to be in, and it's easy to say, I'm still pretty talented. Let me see where I can go. Certainly, Shane Buechele is better than starting quarterbacks in college football.
Right.
Not all of them.
No.
And I wouldn't say he's elite, but he could start if he transferred somewhere else.
Right.
But he said, no, I'm at Texas, and he probably likes the school because it's a fantastic school.
Absolutely.
But he says, no, I'm at Texas. I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to be the backup. I mean, honestly, there's a realistic chance that he could become the starter this year if Sam gets hurt.
Right.
The way he plays is injury favorable.
Yeah.
But I think at that point you owe it to the old guy who's doing it the right way, who's sticking with your program. You owe it to him to play. But maybe you hopefully this game is over in the second quarter, and so the third quarter, the third quarter you play Shane, and then maybe the fourth quarter you say, all right, let's get some playing time against a non-Texas team.
Yeah, exactly.
But ultimately, I do think that I don't want to see Rising before I see Buechele, just because I think you owe it to your veteran quarterback to play him and give him some time, and not just relegate him to the sidelines and say, sorry, you had your chance.
Yeah,
but thanks for wearing a headset.
Yeah,
and not shaving the mustache. Can we talk about that for a sec?
Not
much, but just a sec.
Mustache, terrible look. I don't know if you've seen it. You can look it up. Shane Buechele mustache.
Not good.
Not good. Cameron Rising kind of pulls it off.
Still not good, but
he kind of has a little more, and it's
a look,
and it's been his thing from the start.
Yeah.
Shane Buechele comes in this season standing on headset mustache. Like there's a reason you're not starting.
Right, it's the mustache.
It's the mustache. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's not good. Very, very bad. If you haven't seen it yet, you'll see it. It's bad.
Maybe
it's not good.
All right. Last question for you. You make it quick, but Texas have any shot to win the Big 12?
So that's a tricky question.
Right.
I mean, shot,
Again,
of course.
early.
Every team has a shot to win the Big 12. I would say, barring Kansas.
I said early.
You
Even Kansas is still statistically.
But Kansas is still
statistically.
Yes, Kansas is still statistically perfect in the Big 12.
Right.
Let me say, I wouldn't think it's the biggest surprise in the world if Texas is contending. I mean, realistically, if you look at the conference, what everyone's been saying is that we've got West Virginia and Oklahoma are the only teams with a realistic chance to compete. TCU is always good.
Yep. Oklahoma State's going to have
Oklahoma State maybe, but they're probably not going to be. They're probably not going to be in the talk at the end of the year.
Right.
And so those are your teams that you have to beat if you want to compete. West Virginia comes to Austin this year.
Yeah.
That's going to be a tough game.
That will.
But because it's in Austin and somewhat later in the season, I think that bolsters the chances of winning.
Right.
And then Oklahoma, you never know what's going to happen there. Oklahoma is a toss-up pretty much every year unless someone's just in the gutter.
Yeah.
And I don't think Texas is in the gutter.
No.
Also, you have to factor in the fact that Oklahoma's won the last 2 years, and it's hard to win 3 years in a row.
Very tough,
Especially, I mean, that's just hard to do. This is a squad that's hungry enough that I hate saying, oh, they're hungry, so they're going to win. But that's a game that I conceivably say, I'm not willing to say, oh, OU's going to win, season's over, that's it, Texas is done.
Honestly, TCU may be the toughest of those because that's the earliest in the season.
And
of those 3 games.
TCU has our number.
They have our number. Absolutely have our number. We have not come close to 24-7 is the closest we've come to beating them since they've been in the Big 12.
Last year was closer.
Last year was 24-7.
Oh, you're right. I forgot. It blew open. It was close until the end. I forgot it blew open at the end. Yeah.
But I mean, there's just it hasn't been close. Have them at home though. Would love, and you've said this. You said Texas will be back when we can beat TCU.
That's true. I mean,
and I agree.
You've got a team that comes into the conference, and then maybe the first year Texas beat TCU, but I'm not sure about that. TCU might be undefeated against Texas in
I believe
their Big 12
Yeah.
existence, that's impressive.
It's impressive. It looks really poorly on.
No, it's not good for the Horns. No, and so you can't say Texas is back until you can shake the monkey.
Right.
Teams that are back have shaken all the monkeys.
Right.
The Maryland monkey, we couldn't get that one.
We got to schedule them in the future if we want to shake that.
Couldn't shake that monkey. TCU, that's another monkey. Oklahoma's a monkey.
Yeah.
You get the monkeys off your back, and then Texas is back. So yeah, I like that, and I think going forward, those TCU. I'm going to say TCU is probably a loss.
Yeah.
Just because that's what I think. Oklahoma is a toss-up, maybe statistically trending towards a loss because that's a very good team that can play football, which is more than Texas can say right now. West Virginia also probably trending, well, definitely trending West Virginia, but a winnable game depending on how the season develops. So is Texas in a chance to win the Big 12? I'm going to say no. Mm-hmm. Contend? I'm going to say a strong maybe.
Yeah.
But you can't tell. We saw a terrible game. Mm-hmm. The game, the first game, we saw 3 different teams that game. We saw first quarter Texas, which was awful. Second and third quarter Texas, which was pretty good. Fourth quarter Texas, which was underwhelming.
Yeah, just last
underwhelming.
Season.
Yeah, exactly. It was last year's team in the fourth quarter. So I can't really answer that. I don't think the year's over. A lot of Texas fans are going around and saying, "Oh my gosh, we're horrible. We got to fire our coaches. We got to just, shut the football." You said that. You said shut the football team down. A lot of Texas fans are going around and saying, "This is it." Well, Herman said it's not Armageddon.
Right. It's one game.
It is one game. And so as much as I hate to say, "Oh, next week," because I've said that too much.
Yeah.
Realistically, it is an next week situation. We don't know what this team is, and it's not. There's a good chance that it's not horrible.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Well, James, thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you back.
Oh, it's been a
pleasure. And
pleasure.
hopefully it'll be a much better Texas team we're talking about when you're back on the show.
That's the goal. Thank you, Thomas.
Well, great interview with James. To finish off the show, we're just going to kind of go around the nation in college football and kind of break down what happened. Again, kind of early to make big predictions, but I do kind of have 2 bold predictions. First one, the SEC is actually back. And a lot of people in that cult are going to tell you the SEC has never not been back. They've always been the most dominant conference. But that's completely false. The Big Ten has been running college football the last 2, 3, 4 years. And the thing with the SEC is everybody's like, we're so good, we always win the national championship. I'm like, no, we don't win it. Alabama always wins the national championship. And granted, Georgia was in it too. So last year you kind of had 2 teams that were good. But this year, top to bottom, I think they actually are really solid. Granted, the SEC East is still struggling, but you look at it, Bama by far best team in the nation. I know, obviously, not a tough test playing Louisville, but they still looked great. Georgia's going to be good, regardless of what they ended up going with in that quarterback situation. Just so much talent on that team. Kirby Smart's done just a great job there. Auburn looked really good against Washington. Again, with all these predictions, again, it's the first week of the season, so it's tough to tell, but it's just you can still get a feel of a team and be like, okay, they look good. The quarterback play is there. They're blocking well. They're not making a lot of mistakes. And so that's how, I try to get reads. But Auburn looked really good. Who else? LSU destroyed Miami. And that's one of those where if you're an LSU fan out there, I'm going to say pump the brakes. Y'all looked really good, but it is just week 1. And who knows how good Miami is going to be this year. But they just blew out Miami. Mississippi State, I think, will be a tough team this year just because of Nick Fitzgerald. Anytime you have a good quarterback in the SEC, you're going to be good. And then you have A&M, Florida, Ole Miss, who all, I think have decent chances to at least be competitive teams and be tough on a week-to-week basis there. And so, and that's why I say the SEC is actually back to kind of being really tough, really competitive, top to bottom. Even though, I say the SEC East won't be competitive, but Georgia's good. South Carolina has a chance to be a kind of sleeper team, as does Florida. So it could be, it'll be exciting to see if the SECs can kind of get some stuff going there. The other bold prediction is, just if you're the playoff committee, just already have Alabama and Clemson in the playoff right now, because Alabama, like I said, by and large, best college football team in the nation. And even with the SEC being better, I still think that they're going to cruise through. I didn't watch a ton of the Louisville game, but when I turned it on, it's just this team. Last year, Last year it was like, okay, this may be they're kind of trending downwards. Is this kind of the end of this? No, Tua looks good, and if Tua is a bust, you still got Jalen Hurts to go to. That's not a bad backup. Um, Offensive line is always good there. So many good running backs, so many receivers. It is just a really dominant Alabama team that I think, and they still may drop a game or two, but I think without a doubt put them in the college football playoff. And Clemson, the reason I say that I think Clemson goes to the college football playoff with ease is the ACC is probably hitting one of its weaker points right now. Miami got destroyed. Florida State didn't look good, and after those teams, there's really no other big contenders in the ACC right now. Boston College could be a sleeper to look good, at this point, the way that the ACC is going, and so I think you put Clemson and Bama in there right now. I would also say I'll give my 4 college football picks at the end of this. I also kind of like Wisconsin to make the playoffs. The reason I say that is Ohio State's just a big question mark. I think the Big Ten's down a little bit. We'll see if Penn State can respond from almost being upset by Appalachian State. Michigan, I think Michigan will have a good year this year, and we'll talk about that when we talk about Notre Dame in that game. But Ohio State's a question mark just because, granted, Urban Meyer's he's suspended right now, but I think it almost feels like the university is kind of suspending him and until they can really find out what to do. Now, if they're able to kind of just finish brushing this stuff under the rug, which is I think it's terrible, but they've kind of been able to do it so far, then Ohio State could be a good team. But, with the interim coach, they gave up 31 points to Oregon State. Granted, they scored some 77 points on offense, but 31 points to give up, that is a poor defensive showing. And when you're playing a team like Wisconsin, who has a stout defense and a pretty solid offense, you're not going to win. However, you get Urban Meyer back, I think that does answer some of the question mark. But that's why I like Wisconsin there. Looking at the Big 12, there's a chance that no Big 12 teams make it in this year. OU and West Virginia by far. We were just talking about that with James, but by far the front runner to win the Big 12. Kyler Murray looked really good. It's Florida Atlantic, but he was really efficient. He was running, kind of looked like a Baker Mayfield, Johnny Manziel, little prototype running around, in the backfield and extending plays. But the question with Kyler Murray is the fact that he has been drafted by an MLB team. And to my understanding, his desire is to play professional baseball. And so if I'm sitting in Kyler Murray's shoes, I have a $5 million signing bonus to go play in the MLB. Why am I wasting my time, getting CTE in college football? Now, granted, it may, he may all of a sudden just be a breakout star, win the Heisman, and be like, you know what, I'm just going to stick to football. But, if I'm him and I want to play baseball, you might as well stick around, or you might as well, why are you going to try and risk getting injured and, hindering your baseball career? And so that's why I like West Virginia to win the Big 12. Will Grier is more experienced than Kyler Murray. And I think it's just overall experienced West Virginia team. Now, to be fair, Oklahoma is pretty, other than Kyler Murray, they returned a lot of starters. And so that's why I think they could be dangerous. But I like Will Grier a lot. I think a lot of experience. I think this is going to be one of West Virginia's best teams since Geno Smith. So I think look at them to contend for the Big 12, but I still think they drop a game or two that could keep them from getting out of the college football playoff. Pac-12, way too soon to tell what's going on there. Washington lost on the road, but like I said, a very solid Auburn team. Jared Stidham looks really good. So I think you do not write out Washington yet. As far as other contenders, Stanford struggled early, but they were able to put away San Diego State. Again, it's week 1. They kind of had those jitters in about the first quarter, first half. They went out and dominated. So I think, again, that's a team with a veteran quarterback, veteran offensive players, a team that also could contend. Because that's, it is unbelievable. But you watch a lot of college football, you realize just being a veteran, being experienced, gives you so much of a leg up in competition. And so that's why, like West Virginia with Will Grier, like Stanford, Auburn with Jared Stidham, who maybe his 5th year in college football. I don't know because he transferred. But, those are the teams that often have so much success. That's why it's so rare for these young guys when Johnny Manziel won the Heisman, that's why I believe he was the youngest player, at least at that point, to win. That's why it's so rare to see that. It's because experience matters a lot, especially in college football. I will say one sleeper team that I like is Notre Dame. They handled Michigan, and again, this is a Michigan team that I think is a lot better than they looked against Notre Dame. And in my opinion, that's because I think Notre Dame's a really good team, and that's what they were just able to shut down Michigan. But other than Shea Patterson, who still has some experience, but coming in from Ole Miss, Michigan returned almost their whole team. And I remember last year when they were preseason ranked in the top 10, I was like, that's absurd. They were probably one of the youngest teams in college football. And now that they returned those guys, I think, I think as a Texas fan, you got to resonate with Michigan fans. Kind of always being overhyped. You bring in this big splashy hire, this guy, kind of charismatic guy who's great at recruiting, and then just not able to beat rivals. Kind of mediocre team, but still, Jim Harbaugh took this team to back-to-back 10-win seasons when he first came in. They struggled last year, but again, a young team. I think this will be a good Michigan team, and I think if you're a Michigan fan, you need to cool it on the fire Jim Harbaugh talk, because he is one of the better coaches in college football. However, I will say, if they go have a 6 or 7 win season, or even like 8 wins, then yeah, he's on the hot seat. But I think this is a Michigan team that can easily win 9 or 10 games. And who knows if Ohio State, if there still are more complications with that whole deal, it could be a chance for Michigan to win that division and go to the Big Ten championship. But going back to Notre Dame, I do think that they could be a sleeper. And they do have some, of course, Notre Dame always has one of the best schedules, being an independent and just kind of picking a bunch of Power 5 teams to play. They have Stanford and Virginia Tech, both of those teams right now. I think Stanford's 10, Virginia Tech's like 11. But both of those games will be interesting to watch down the stretch. Other sleepers I have, Auburn, West Virginia, and Washington. Could be interesting to see another Auburn-Washington rematch. Oh, another thing I meant to say about the Washington is that they lost basically on a road game. I mean, they were playing in Atlanta. For Auburn, that's a 2-hour drive. Washington, that's like a 4 or 5 hour flight all the way down there. And so that's another thing to kind of look at, a close road loss to a really good Auburn team. This is definitely a team that I still think that, could very much win the Pac-12 and very much make it into the college football playoff. But as of right now, my college football playoff, the 4 teams I would have in right now, Bama, obviously, Clemson, Wisconsin, and Georgia. And I was wondering, kind of going back and forth between Georgia and Washington. And the reason I was going back and forth between those teams is it's just, with the way this looks, thinking at the end of the season, Bama would have to play Georgia in the SEC championship game. And granted, those 2 teams could still get in, like what happened last year. But, I think, the committee might not be like, okay, we did that last year. Are we going to do the exact same thing this year? And it also is just harder if you've already lost a game or 2. It's harder to get in at that point. But just as far as, Georgia's still undefeated, and I think Georgia still looks really good. But I think those sleepers of Auburn, West Virginia, Washington, Notre Dame, don't be surprised if one of those teams finds their way into the college football playoff by the end of the year. And last year, I think the only one of my teams that made the college football playoff that I said when I said my college football playoff 4 teams at the beginning of the year was Alabama. So a lot's going to change. It's going to be exciting to see. But we should be back here same time next week, hopefully after a win, and hopefully with a lot of improvements in that win. Anyways, from the Thomas Fitch Sports Show, I'm Thomas Fitch. Hook 'em horns.